Hey everybody, and welcome to the second episode of FreeBSD Guides. In the last episode I showed you how to install FreeBSD, and I thought before we get into installing software and setting everything up, I show you a couple of tools that you can use to inspect the running system and see what's going on. The first tool I want to talk about is Top, and it's very similar to Linux or macOS, except for this line, the ARC or Adaptive Reference Cache, which in essence is the ZFS read cache. So it will use up all your memory if you read really a lot of different data constantly from disk, except for the last gigabyte. There's a sysctl or a config file where you can change the value of how much memory ZFS is supposed to take for the ARC, but in default configuration, it will take up almost all of it. That also means, of course, that it's really fast to read from the ARC if you really have everything in there. So it's a nice feature, but maybe you have to look at it. If you have a machine with lots of RAM like I do right now, usually it won't ever bother you too much. But anyway, check out this line, keep it in your sight and see if it's growing too excessively. There are other options in Top on FreeBSD, like you can ask it to give you the jail ID to see which jail the processes are running in. And look at the man page for all the special things, but in general, Top is top. Another tool that is very much like on other systems is ifconfig. That's very simple, doesn't need much explanation. But the next tool does, and this is Systat. And Systat is for inspecting all kinds of system-related statistics. For example, the overview option is maybe VMstat, and then if you give it an interval in the end, it will update every second. You can see the interrupts, virtual memory, real memory, disk throughput, and these kind of things. That's sometimes really nice to get an overview of what's going on your system. But Systat has many different modes. For example, you can call IOstat, you will get the disk throughput. Since we don't do anything on the disk right now, there's not much happening, but this you can use for checking out how much you write to disk. If you're using ZFS, there are a couple of things to remember. That ZFS is flushing to disk every 5 seconds, I believe. So if you see a little bit of pumping in this graph, that's sometimes actually normal because ZFS is writing to the intent log first and then flushes that batch to disk. So sometimes you don't see sustained disk writing because of this. Right, okay, so let's get to another mode that is ifstat. That will give you network throughput, very easy to understand. There's another cool mode that is called netstat, and that will give you all the established connections right now. And as we can see, apparently we have a sendmail process running that is doing SMTP traffic, or at least opens a socket. So we got to restrict that later on when we set up the system for production use. The next mode that is kind of useful is TCP. And that will give you basically the same output like netstat with the statistics mode enabled. Now, you don't need to have integer values here as an interval. You can actually specify floats, and then you can see, okay, maybe not here. Let's do it on ifstat. So you can see the resolution goes down to milliseconds even. So yeah, in case you need to see a finer grained picture of your system, you can use floats as intervals. Then regarding your overall machine configuration, there's a command called kenv, and that will read out some BIOS values, for example, also the chassis, vendor, a motherboard serial number in case you need to upgrade the BIOS or any kind of firmware. It will include a couple of other interesting informations, but the best place to look for device info is actually another command, and that is PCI conf-l-cv. And this will give you a list of all the PCI devices. For example, here for the network card, you can see the chipset of that particular Intel card. So this is really nice for getting a hardware overview of your machine. Then there are a set of other tools that you already know. DF, easy. You can see the ZFS volumes here. Then there's, of course, PS. So now we can use PS to see if there's actually a send mail running. And yes, there is a send mail running. There are other tools like strace, htop, and lsoff that are not installed by default and are a little bit harder to install as well. So htop and strace, they need the Linux compatibility layer installed. We will talk probably about that in a later episode. But just so you know, if you Google for FreeBSD htop or FreeBSD strace, you will find tutorials on how to install the Linux compatibility mode or layer. lsoff you can install without the Linux compatibility layer, but you need the kernel sources available on your hard drive. And if you have, you can install it and use it like you used to do it. So lastly, I want to talk about a few resources that you can use to answer your questions yourself. And one of these websites is the wiki freebsd.org page with lots of information on how to set up stuff or solve certain problems. Definitely a nice place to check out. Then there's the Unix Toolbox website. If you Google for Unix Toolbox, you will find this page. And it's full of useful commands for Linux and for FreeBSD. That's the nice thing. For example, one command we haven't talked about, sysctl, to read and set the CTLs. You can use that to see which CPU you have, or these kind of things. And you can see there's an ATA control list command or USB defs, similar to the PCI conf tool. So this is a really nice place to find help for all kinds of common tasks. So check that out. And lastly, there's the FreeBSD handbook. If you go to FreeBSD.org documentation handbook, it's really a nice documentation piece. It's full of useful info. It starts really nice by telling you what FreeBSD is all about and what the philosophy is. And then, installing and Unix basics and applications and, all kinds of common tasks that you could do with FreeBSD, all explained there. And if that isn't enough, then you can still use Google, right? Okay, so I hope this is a useful little wrap up for you to figure out stuff on your own. And in the next episode, we will finally start setting up everything like I would do it, and install some software, some with port system, some with the port system, and some with the package system, so you get to see how both work. And then, I don't know, we'll do something like installing a WordPress, web server, PHP, everything on FreeBSD maybe. Okay, so see you next time.